All right, welcome back. I'm excited to get started, pick up a little bit where we got left off last week. Um, let's uh, let's talk about what that is. Let's move over to this other screen here. So last week, I actually don't have the preview running. Let me run that preview. Last week we set up the design system for the app, and then we took some extra time that we had to run or to set up like our login UI. So we'll see this preview come up in a second. We basically built a screen that I had designed in Figma that's supposed to be like a login landing page that has like some inputs to enter like a username and password and log in. I kind of thought after the fact about how I didn't love this because in thinking further along in the app, I'm not really sure if I want it to be like username and password login or we wanted to add like a sign in with Google or maybe either one. I actually think email and password makes more sense for this, but I digress. I think that we'll change up a couple of the phrasing in here, um, but that's fine. We could totally do that. But what we'll do today is we will um, basically try to build out the stuff that powers this screen. And if we have time, we might do some more UI stuff because there's a little more that I want to do to this screen. But we've got our little low-tech checklist there in the bottom left to go over everything we're going to do. So one thing I really want to do with this project, even though I feel like I wing it every stream, is I want to make sure that we're kind of good about like documentation and planning for each step that we try to do. So I actually think it would be cool to sort of build out like an architecture diagram of uh, how this screen is going to work. Um, and then we'll go through and kind of build the few things we need. We'll need a login repository, which will simulate like actually being able to log into the application, right? We'll have like our login use case. If you're not familiar with use cases, I'll talk through that when we get to it. That's something I don't do a lot, but I really want to explore for this project. I find it interesting. And then we'll build out like the login view model, and then hopefully by the end of the stream, we'll have a working login screen. Probably what we'll do is have it accept like we could do some error handling if we have time, like no empty inputs, but uh, let's just say like for today we'll accept like any username and password will be valid to log in. We'll just make some sort of like dummy service that passes it all through. So that's the rough idea. Let me know if you have any questions. But if not, I think what we'll start with is sort of building out like the diagram. Um, so I made like an empty space here on Miro. If you're unfamiliar with Miro, it's like an app for whiteboarding. But we can use this to kind of talk through the architecture. And actually, I realized you can share these. So I think what I'm going to do is I want this to be like a living document of all of the pieces in the app and how they come together. Um, are you going to build a dummy service or just return dummy data from the repo? Um, I'm not really sure what the difference is in your mind. Those sound like the same thing to me, just said different ways. I'll want to make like a legitimate login repo that says like, I don't know, like given an email and password, like I don't know if we would want to return like a Boolean, or technically I think in a um yes, or okay. Um then the latter. I'm just gonna create like something that returns dummy data. I'm not gonna make a server with that logic. What I'm thinking of, in short, is like we'll make an interface called login repository, and then we'll make a class called dummy login repository. And the dummy login repository is just going to return true. That's what I'm thinking we'll do for this sample. But we'll have the interface set up so that one day, if and when, hopefully a when, we want to have like a backend for this, we just swap out that implementation, but the rest of this structure as it exists should still work. Um, if that makes sense. That's what I think we'll go for. Um, so I have a thing on the bottom about use cases, and maybe it makes a little more sense to talk about this first. Um, because that's something that I don't do a lot, but I think is interesting. But let's get through what we know we're gonna have first. So the way this is gonna be structured is like we're gonna have and let's can I make this so it always fills it in? Mm, let's be white. So we're gonna have like our login screen. Okay, this is our UI layer. So this will be UI, like just our UI stuff. Now, if you are interested, you can actually do exclamation point new vid and see a YouTube video I did recently comparing MVVM and MVI. And actually, for this short segment here, I'm going to try to avoid the buzzwords. But let's just talk about like the components we're going to need and how I think they should connect together. So there's two things we need from the start, which I could talk about without a lot of explanation. Is like we'll have our login screen, and then we'll have our login view model. And what this is going to do is, let's see, this is going to expose our login view state, which we actually made in the previous stream, which let me show you what that looks like real quick. Our login view state is like, what is the current username and what is the password? And actually, what we would want to add is we would want to be like, you know, um, when the user's logging in, maybe we want to show progress, right? So we could have like a show progress boolean here. And, we could add more to this. Maybe we want to disable the buttons while you're logging in. We can add more to this view state later, but that's what this is. Our view model is going to tell our screen, Rogue Assassin, thank you for the subscription. Those of you who saw the intro video, I actually got a great idea, aka Matt had a great idea that we should make the sub alert the Wednesday sound, but I didn't have time to do that today, but maybe soon. Okay, but our login view model is going to expose a login view state. Now we also need to talk about a connection that goes the other way, which is from from the screen to the view model, which this will be, UI events. So one way to think about this could be like, text changed, button clicked. These are things that the login screen will need to communicate to the view model. And all we're going to do is say, hey, this happened, and we're going to let the view model decide what to do with that information. So that's the recap. Wild Dog, welcome to the stream. We're actually not that far in. What we're doing now is we're talking about the login screen that we built last week. This is all the UI stuff that we did. And today we're going to do the work to actually like power this login screen and make it functional. And we're starting off by sort of drawing a diagram of all the pieces involved in making this screen functional. And once we understand everything we need to make and how they're connected, we can go ahead and start building those. So that's actually where we're at so far. And I was just explaining, we'll have like our login screen, which is the UI. We'll have our login view model, and all these things do for each other is the view model exposes like a view state. I don't know how well y'all can see this, or if I need to zoom in. That is much better. Albeit I'll have to move around a little bit. The view model exposes a view state. This will probably use like a state flow, and then the screen will update the view model whenever there's some sort of UI event, like text changes, button clicks. So now this actually gets into a thing that I'm not really sure how I want to handle. So let's talk about it. So what I typically do is I'll make another piece over here. Let's call this login repository. And just for clarity, like what this is going to do is we're going to have like a function inside of here that would be like login, email, password. And then this could, like, for simplicity's sake, let's say it returns like a Boolean. And you can't see this very well. How do I want to do this? Let's make this wider. Center this. Okay, I want this to be inside the box, but I don't think I can do that. Okay, but this is what our login repository does. Remove the fun. No, we're going to have fun here. We're going to keep it. And so what I would typically do in my apps is we could add a connection here between the view model and the repository. Okay, and then we can say, we call login with that email and password. Nope. Where did I know that you have it? I did this the other day. How do I rotate this? That's not what I want. There we go. That's what it is. This is what I would typically do. And then we could say that this is done. But there's an interesting topic that comes up on Android sometimes that I see other people use, which is the idea of use cases. And a use case is like another layer between, say, your view model and the repository. And I think the overall argument is, like, this repository is going to have specific information about how you log in, right? But all the view model cares about is like, hey, I have these pieces of information and I need this back. And one could argue that's what a repository does as an interface, but some people say you need use cases. And let me find a really good post on this. I'll drop this in chat. But I read this one a while ago about why you need use cases. And let's talk about it before we get started on building our own stuff. So let's skip this diagram at the top real quick because it doesn't really have the same thing. But these are the same questions I had when I get started. It's like, what are use cases supposed to do? And then this idea, why can't I directly call the repository from the presenter or the view model? And, isn't this overkill if you just have that? And so that's kind of my thought going into this. But this article tries to explain why you would do that. And one of them being kind of in principle, like, you want this separation of concerns. And I think they make an argument that you don't really have that if you're going straight from your view model to your repository. And let me see if I can find where they explain that. Where is that? All over your head. Yeah. I'm trying to find an example about why they do this, and I can't. Well, one example, or one idea that I thought was really good is this helps avoid, like, God classes. So one example being, let's say you have some code in your view model that interacts with two different repositories. Now you've got two parameters on your view model, and then your view model is going to be doing stuff that is like interacting with two repositories when really you only want it to do one thing, right? So I think they clarify, let me find the use case. So they change it to just get user transactions use case, which means it needs to know nothing about how transactions are found, aka does it come from a repository or whatever else, but this is just a thing that needs to be happened. We need to get the user transactions. So it's really just another layer. Like CP says, it makes logic a little more clear this way, but it will feel like overkill for certain scenarios. But I'm kind of interested in trying it out tonight. And we'll see it. we'll see how it goes. Um, but let me talk about, oh, they talk about, doing it anyways for consistency, for protection from future changes, which is good, something to keep in mind. Oh, this is also kind of what CP said in different words, is it's got like quote unquote the screaming architecture, and that like this is very explicit about what's happening, arguably a lot more explicit than just having it talk to the repository. Um, what I don't like about it is that typically we see use cases defined as like interfaces so that we can mock them well in our tests. Testing is another thing that helps. If I don't have use cases, I have to mock my entire login repository. But if I switch that into like just a use case, then I only have to modify my use case for a test. But yeah, one thing I don't like is that they're typically interfaces. Um, so that means you have like an interface and an implementation for every use case, and I don't really know what's a good naming convention because I hate this. I hate the impl connection, doing like IMPL for implementation. But like I said, I think we'll try it tonight and we'll see how it goes. Um, so with that, um, let's pull up our login repository even further. Let's get rid of this arrow. Let's pull that away for a second. And let's just throw in another layer here um, that we're going to call, okay, that we're going to call this login use case. And effectively what this will do is this will pass information from there, which then goes into here. And so we'll just have this nice little layer, but it will help us scale up if anything changes about, logging in. So this is the sort of flow that we're going to go for today. Um, Trashcan is back with another cube solve. This is the flow that we're going to go towards today. And then once I crank out this Rubik's Cube, we will actually start building out those screens. So let's do that real quick. Hi, Trashcan. I hope you're doing well. Trashcan, did you see the new Pittsburgh Knights decals that are coming out next week, among other esports teams? I really hate like that I don't have enough light in this room to really see the colors well, but we'll see how this goes. Oh, and unrelated, but for the other Android folks who are in here, who are familiar with the Kotlin programming language, I learned that the official scrambler used by the World Cube Association is written in Kotlin. Um, I can like pull it up after I do this, but I thought that was fascinating. All right, let's see. Let's see what we can do here. We've been staying under 30 seconds, so I'm hoping I can stick to that once more. No idea. Let's find out. Um, wait, no, I put that. Oh no, this is not going to be under 30 seconds, I don't think. Oh no, my light is messing me up. Oh no, this one was bad. This one was bad. My lighting screwed me up. Oh, that was real bad. My lighting, like I messed up a couple colors because it looks really light on the screen, but oh, my look ahead is pretty good, but like, so I looked well lit on the screen because like I have a ring light around the webcam and the screen is white, but all of my lights are actually off in this room. So I'm kind of like holding this under the webcam, and red and orange look really similar to me under this light. Let's see if I can do that again. Redeem an actual 30-second one for Trashcan. Uh, maybe that should be my. Maybe I should clarify that in the thing, but like I'll do it until I'm under 30 seconds. I feel like 30 seconds is a good time. Um, okay, let's see if we can do this again. Oh no. Oh wait. Sorry. Those don't count. All right, there we go. 27. What makes you think I have $20? Oh, thank you for the bits, Trashkit. I appreciate it. I messed up an algorithm in there. I could have shaved off like 2 seconds. I'm upset. But alas, we'll get another one in soon. All right, so let's go back. So I'm gonna let me share this link with y'all in chat if you're curious. But I'll probably put this in the repo somewhere and try to make this sort of a living thing as I navigate other screens. And maybe we can simplify this um, because because this pattern is something that will probably continue throughout every screen we work on. So maybe we don't need it. Maybe this can just be a sample of what the architecture will look like in the app. Um, oh my god. You can if you want to. I'll always stop. But anyways, I will keep going until someone redeems it, but I have no problem switching gears twice. We can go ahead and check off the arc diagram, and if there's no objections from the Android folks about um, this sort of pattern, let's dive in. And you'll notice I planned on it and that the checklist is kind of in order of the way we would build things. If my use case is supposed to talk to the repo, I need to build the repo first. And then so on. And so I can't build my view model till I have that. And then I can't connect these until the end. So it's kind of built in order. Um, so let's get started. One thing we need actually is I wonder. So we had a login screen. Um, issue. I called it a landing page, but we closed this last week because we built the UI for it. Um, to start building from the use case, we could. I guess technically I just wouldn't be able to build the use case implementation, but I could build the interface. Um, and then I guess instead of having a dummy login repository, I could just have like a dummy use case. Um, you've been doing that. Okay, so you would do like use case view model repository, or like just start with the use case and then go from there. You can build the info and have a repo interface in that. Okay, I see. We could try it that way. Um, hang out and you can help me. Uh, ooh, good questions in here. Wild Dog, are use cases facade pattern implementation to avoid injection of multiple repositories? Yes, in certain scenarios. Like, let me post I don't know if I actually posted the link in chat for this blog post we were looking at, but it doesn't have to be that way. But yes, that was one example from this blog post. Is the idea of avoiding injecting multiple dependencies and really just being able to focus on the use case that you need. Um, So that's one way to look at it. Even though in our case that we're about to build, that's not going to be true. I don't think. Um, but it could be one day. Um, so let's throw this back in progress. We won't close this until we finish out all of what we're doing. So let's get started. Let's make a new branch. We're going to call this TOA 7. We'll do login use case. It's too late, Tim. We're adding use cases for the sake of adding use cases. That's what I want to do. Because one thing I do like, and this is kind of where I was on the fence, is like I think consistency is important. Um, but yeah. So one other thing I took away from this post is sort of how they structured it. So I noticed that they would put like I think they do it a little differently, but they put like a domain folder and then they put the information inside of there and then the use case inside of that. I'm not sure how I feel about this folder structure. It's something that we can think about. Um, you know, like I have at the root, I have a UI folder and I have login inside of here. And one could argue that that shouldn't be the case, that login should be its own folder. And then I could have like a subset, which is like login UI. What do you think, chat? Do you like that better if my like root packages are like at a feature level and then we split up the responsibilities within that? Or at the top level, should we just have a minimal amount of folders and then we split out features inside of that? I don't know if I can explain what I mean. Packaging per feature? All right, we could try that out. Dynamic features. Maybe one day. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole for today. But okay, so let's make a new package here. Let's call it login UI. And we'll take our files from last week and then we'll throw that in there. Wait for everything to refactor and delete this one. And we can probably clean this up, but let's do that later. Okay, and then we'll make a new package inside of here. Let's do domain.useCase. Use cases? Use case is fine. And let's make it. So this will be an interface, login use case. So there's a couple. All right. So we got to think a little bit more specific about how this is all going to work. Well, the first thing is we know we're going to want a suspending function called login. It's going to take an email and a password. I should actually, to avoid confusion, before I go down the line, replace everywhere that I have username with email because I like that better. So let me do that so I don't get confused elsewhere. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to do that real quick. We're going to change that to email. We're going to change this to on email changed. We're going to change this to email. Oops, we're going to change that. And we're going to change this to email input. Okay, we replaced everything. I'm not going to rerun the emulator right now, but that's fine. So one thing I got to think about is what should the return type of this function be? Now, I guess one could argue it kind of depends on like what's going to happen next. Some people might make a login repository that say returns an authentication token, because that could be something you care about. Or maybe it returns account information. One way we could sort of future-proof that is we could make like a domain model called login response, and then have that like give us whatever information we need. Um, kind of like that idea because then if something changes about logging in, I just changed my login response model. Um, let's go down that rabbit hole and let's see. Let's start there. Where are you gonna do it? That is a good question. What I do now is I have like a separate sort of component that I call a user provider. And when the login completes, I take the user provider and then I store that authentication token. Um, and maybe that's what we'll want to do. But I think we're kind of getting a little further than I want to for this particular stream. I kind of want to just be able to power the login screen. So I'm actually leaning towards let's make a class called login result. Let's say that it can have, or login response. Um, let's say it could have an auth token, but we won't do anything with it yet. Let's define this. So this is the response, or what do we want to call it? This is the data class. This is the information we expect to be returned from any successful. Let's close this emulator tab. Sorry, we're not using that right now. Successful login request. So, and then param auth token, we could say this is a unique token that will allow us to authenticate future requests inside the application. This is something we know we will want eventually. So let's roll with it. Let's call it that for now. So our use case will want to return a login response. But now this gets even trickier, is value classes to avoid accidentally mixing up the email params, for example. I've thought about it. Not sure if we want to use it here. We could encapsulate these into like a login request. If you like that, let's try it. Let's see. I'm down to try new things, and we can always sort of revert. I don't think. Yeah, I think that when I will do that if a function gets too many parameters. Like if this were requesting like 5 different things, then I would put that into like a single param and then throw that in a data class. Here, I didn't think about it, but I kind of like it because it kind of again hints at, I guess you're not really abstracting it away, but if I want to say, I need email password and something else, then I'm set and I don't have to. I will still have cascading changes and that everywhere that I use a login request, I would need to modify it, but I wouldn't have all these cascading method changes necessarily. So I could see benefit to it. But not here. Oh, I thought you meant, okay. I thought you meant doing something like this. I thought you were saying like login request, throwing this in here, and then being like login request. Um, I thought that's what you were describing. Um, hmm. I hadn't thought about it. Let me take a quick look at the documentation for that because I haven't looked at that in a while. They're called value classes. Is that the official name? Um, or oh, it's still inline classes in the documentation. Okay, you know what? I have seen this. Oh, inline is deprecated, but the title of the page is still inline classes. Make it make sense. Okay, so there's an example here of using this. So, hmm, what is okay, so riddle me this, Tim. Like if I do this, um, is this not oh without. So if I do this, like what's the benefit? What am I getting out of this? Um, is it like if I want to change it away from a string in the future, I change it here? Um, is it got it? Because they have to create an email class. They can't just pass a string. Interesting. Okay. Then I guess I thought we would fix that if we made like a login request thing, but then we just have the same problem in a different spot. Interesting. Um, I'm not against it. Uh, I guess I just hesitated because personally I've never used this, but I could see a benefit of it. Um, let's do it. I don't know if I'm going to do this everywhere in the app that I consume like strings, but uh, I suppose for logging in, it's an area where we might want that certainty. Um, okay. Um, let's try it out. Let's roll with it. If I hate it later, I'll remove it, but I don't think I will. But now we're getting into yet another concern I have about um, this flow, which is thinking about error handling. So let's say, I would expect, this is the format of data I expect when I have a successful login. But then there's a question of, well, logins can be unsuccessful, either invalid credentials or like a networking error. Like I can't log in if I don't have internet. And so then we also start to wonder, well, how do I handle that? Who's responsible for that? And something I like to do, and what we actually did on the study guide app, if y'all remember, is we had this sealed class in here called data response that was something to encapsulate both a success state and an error state. So this had a generic type. I want a data response of something, and I'm either going to get success or I'm going to get failure. But the nice thing is I can then just return data response everywhere that I go. Um, so I don't know if I actually think this is a common paradigm that a lot of apps use. So I think that I'm going to continue to use that here. So now I'm rethinking the package structure here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a package called core. I'm going to make a package inside here called data, and that's where I'm going to put that file. I'm going to put that inside like our core data package because this is something that will affect the data layer all around the application. And we can add a little more documentation here, which is, can I say, you know what, maybe I won't. I think this is relatively self-documenting. So we're going to leave that. But then also what I want to do after I talked about the um, refactoring, so I want to put this UI package inside the core package. How do I do that? Um, I don't want to put it here. Move package to another package. Ha. And then I can just do core refactor. That will change up a lot of stuff. Now we've got our UI components. That's kind of weird that we have core UI core ignore it. We'll clean that up later. But let's keep focusing on login. So we've got our login response. We've got our login use case. Now this can return a data response for a login response. This is a little interesting convention here, but I like it. And now that we've got it, like I said, I do want to keep up with documentation in this app, so we're going to try to document everything as we go. But sometimes I gotta like work out all the thoughts and actually get it down before we can document it. So this function consumes a user's email and password. That's a good question. Let me think about that. Let me think about that for a second. And tries to log them in. Um, return a data response that contains a login response if successful, or an error if not. Is this a response or a result? Because the use case doesn't know if a request is happening. Well, request is ambiguous here, right? Request doesn't need to be. You're right. Like, so Kotlin has a result class um, that is the same idea. Uh, I don't like it because there's some weirdness about it, and that like it doesn't provide you like type safety in the same way. So you see how this has like get or null. So like if I check if it's successful, and then I want to say, okay, it is successful, so I expect to have a value, I can't do that. And so then I end up having to like force unwrap it or something. So that's why you still see people writing their own wrapper around it. Um, but I suppose we could meet in the middle and we could change this to like data result. Um, and they're like, okay, that's a little more clear. Like this is the result of some data request. Um, but to CP's point, like, request is ambiguous. Like, sure, the use case doesn't know that a network request is being made, but the use case knows that it's requesting to log in, right? Like that's one other way of phrasing it. So I think a response makes sense. But result also makes sense because I guess I'm not expecting a um, oh my god, y'all are coming at me for all of my naming. Okay. Um, this is all valid though. Uh, outcome. Yeah, I that's valid. Outcome is valid. Um, and like on one hand, I would love to use the built-in result class. But like I said, this is what I don't like. Um, because I can't like just name it result. Yeah, all right, that's fair. Why am I overcomplicating it? I just have to make sure I watch my imports later on when I do this, but that's fine. Okay. But now let's talk about login response then. So, okay. So let's think about login. So what does my use case need to know? So let's talk hypothetically. I have a real service that returns a words that returns an authentication token. So if I do this, what I would probably want to do is take that authentication token, store it somewhere, retrieve it later. The use case should do that. That's what we talked about earlier. If we have multiple services, the use case would just call them back. But then the question could become, well, what does the use case actually need to return to the view model, right? And I guess the view model, all it's going to need to know is I guess, was it successful or not? Did we log in or did we not? Um, that is a good question. I typically would do validation. I typically do it right inside the view model, but um, no, but that's well, but login and I guess okay. I think I misunderstood. Validation in terms of like, is it like a valid email and password? Like that I think makes sense inside the this layer. Something that I would do is like, I guess maybe not. I'm thinking of like, well, what if they try to submit and it's empty? To me, I typically do that check right in the view model. I'll have like a private function called validate. Um, but actually, maybe what we should do is we could have a validate input use case that tells you if your input for logging in is valid or not. Um, and then maybe return, error messages if not, or something. Um, maybe that's another way of thinking about use cases. But I'm actually thinking about this login one again, and I'm thinking of what does it really need to return? Um, and does it need to return this? Oh, see, look, this already refactored. I don't want Kotlin.result here. Um, yeah, I want a TOA result. Um, or could this really simply just return a Boolean? I guess it depends on whether or not this does validation. But if we assume that this does not do validation, it's probably fine for it to return a Boolean. Because I just need to know if it logged in or not. I guess no, it's more than that, because if they don't log in, I want to know why. So now I'm back to wanting this result class. Because if it doesn't log in, I can get the error message. So, okay, I think this is good. But then I think the only other question is, well, what do we actually want to call this login response? Um, like, do we want a login response or do we want like a login result? Um, I've got so many different ideas now because um, but it's a sealed class. Yeah, that was another idea, right? So we could have like sealed class login result. This could be like, you know, success. This will have an auth token. Um, but then we could also be like a little more, then we could have like, you know, something specific like invalid credentials could be a login result. Um, and then we could have like a fallback. Um, which is like an error message. This is one way of thinking about it. Um, what do we think about this instead? Um, we like it. Okay, let's roll with it. So let's just copy that down here to success. Um, so the reason I didn't go with an exception is because I'm kind of thinking of like, if I have a networking error, if I get like a 400 or something, like I don't want to bubble up like the retrofit throwable, but I could map it to my own throwable, I guess. Um, possible results for an attempt to log in to user. Another thing to think about is like how this comes into play with the UI layer, which is you know, this doesn't have any information to it, which means when the UI sees this, it's going to need to look up what error message to display. But then here I was implying that the error message is going to come from somewhere else. And now I've got that classic weirdness of like, I might get a string, I might want to look up a string resource. What do I do? So maybe like a simplified solution could just be to make like this another object and say if the UI sees this, it shows a default error message. And then maybe that for the intent of a login result, I don't really care about the details. I just want to know, did it work or not? If you can tell me why it didn't work, that'd be great. But if not, no worries. Classic. Um, so we can say this will be returned if there was no account matching the requested credentials. And then this will be returned for any unknown exceptions when attempting to log in. Let's start with this. We might change it, but I think this is a good way to start. So let's roll. Ah, more good ideas. Should invalid credentials be nested in failure? You could do that. One benefit to that would be, oh my god, you are all on the same. You are all on the same wavelength. I love it. All right, we're gonna do chat-driven development. I'm also learning a lot about how other people do things that are not how I do them. So we'll throw this in here. This will be a failure. Um, an unsuccessful attempt to log in. Yeah, I think here the only things I would think about are like a scenario I would care about is say invalid credentials. Um, Otherwise I don't care. But now if I call failure, if I put failure at the root, then what do we put here? For, do we want to call it like unknown? Um, all right, I thought that was silly, but now I typed it and I don't hate it. Um, Generic T. Um, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Let's go with unknown. I think that's like super clear. It's an unknown failure. Okay, we got a lot going on here, but we did it. So now we can forget our custom result class from earlier for now, and instead we'll log in with an email and password, and we'll get a login result. So as much as y'all ganged up on me, I think that we got to a good place. This is what a use case should be. A login result providing the hazard. Hi, thank you for the follow. You're right, success would not even need the token. Login result providing information, explaining whether or not the attempt to log in is successful. Cheers, Rogue Assassin. But doesn't unknown failure imply a failure even when there is none? No. It implies that it failed and I just don't know why. But it's a way of specifying a attempt to log in was successful. It's a way of specifying, there was a failure, but it could have failed for any reason that I don't really care about. But I do care about invalid credentials because I might want to do something specific to that. specifically, I can see at a UI layer, I might show a different error message for invalid credentials than I would for a generic network exception. And again, we don't know that this means network exception, but in practice, that's what it's going to mean. So maybe that's one way to think about it. But the idea is we're extracting away the idea that this is a network exception. But in practice, that's what is likely to bubble up to here. So an enum is valid. I'm just kind of sealed classes are kind of Kotlin-y, and that's how I started. But an enum is totally valid, especially because none of these are all objects. None of them have detailed information. Um, this is effectively just another enum. Uh, but we've got our use case that contains this information. Okay, we've got email, password, login, result. We really narrowed that down. Can't believe it took us an hour. Let's throw in some more documentation really quick here. Actually, maybe we don't need to. This is kind of self-documenting. Um, so, um, so actually, I thought about that. The reason I didn't, what Supi said about properties to specify where the error happened, the reason I didn't is because let's throw on our like product hats for when this is a real thing. You never want to tell the user which credential was wrong, because someone who is trying to be malicious can use that to narrow down why they have your credentials wrong. Like, if you admit, like, oh, this email is valid, but your password's wrong, you've now like narrowed down which of the things they need to crack. So companies don't like to do that. We would just like to say there was an issue with your email or password. But I think that's a good middle ground, and that's helpful. Yes, exactly what Wild Dog said. And I think that's helpful because from a practical standpoint, I want to know, and then I'm gonna like click on my password and be like, oh shit, I typed it in wrong. So here's a documentation question for y'all. Another thing about use cases is they should only have one method. It should do one thing, and the name should describe what it does. So my first question being, where do I put the documentation? This documentation may make sense on the login method because it allows me to reference like the parameters. Aha, you are cutting me off. I was going to do the invoke thing next. But you beat me to it. Yeah, so if we use the operator fun invoke, it makes it easier to call the use case, or it makes it a little more pretty. So let's do that. Invoke. But so here's I guess one of the things is like these little brackets, these are a way of referencing the actual parameter. So if I refactor this, it will refactor the comment automatically. This is super nice. But if I were to put this documentation on the interface instead, I lose that connection. But I think that it could go either way, and this is why I mentioned it should only have um, you might have different implementations of the login use case. Yeah. Um, so Larry, I don't think you should. I think that two functions defeats the purpose of a use case. I think it's intended to really shine on that single responsibility principle, and that like it does one thing. Um, Maybe for simplicity, well, in an implementation, you could have like private functions to split up, responsibilities, but the use case interface should just have one function. This problem will resolve itself when you move to a single data class as a use case input. So you're saying if I did make this one single input, then it wouldn't be a big deal. It could just go on here. I mean, I guess we can um, just put it right on the interface. We'll say this use case, we could even make it vague, consumes any information required to log in the user and attempts to do so. And like, cool, then we could just like get rid of all of this, and that's all we really need to say. I suppose this is one way to do it, which isn't terrible. So. Oh, okay. So, um, what do we, what do now you can remove the comma because it doesn't add anything. I mean, that's fair. That's fair. Um, I think especially with, because y'all hammered me so hard on naming conventions, I think you're right. Like, I find this to be very self-documenting. And I do say that if your comment doesn't add anything new, then it shouldn't be there. So yeah. Yeah, I don't, it's a balance, right? Like it's I think this is good. I think like the reason I want to document it on streams is because I want someone to be able to open up a random file and figure out what it does. And I want them to not have to be an experienced developer, like really experienced, to know it. Um, the green color. Uh, you know what I mean? Like everyone watching this, or at least the people participating in chat, um, you're gonna open this, you're gonna look at it, and it's gonna be super clear. But someone else might be like, "What the heck is this?" Um, even though like there's only 20 lines here, like it might just help to say like, "This is what it does." Um, I don't think it's a bad thing. Should we add all similar use cases in one class? No. Like I think that yes, it can feel like there's a lot of use cases, but I think that that's a good thing and that you're splitting up responsibilities, but you can you could have use cases that depend on each other, right? Like let's think about this. Let's briefly walk through an example of how you could have multiple use cases but still kind of combine the work. So let's say we had another one that we called store token use case or something. Because we know that like at one point we're going to get like an auth token, right? And we're going to need to like store that somewhere in preferences. So yeah, Docker is really cool for adding stuff. So let's say we have these, right? I have a use case for login. I have this other use case for storing tokens. I think it's entirely valid to be like, you know, we could have a login use case impl that could consume another use case, right? Um, and then when this one runs, we could say, you know, login and then store token use case. I did not make it a property. Dot invoke. So each individual, each individual task or use case is going to be its own interface. But when it comes to the implementation layer, I think it's totally fine to sort of combine these concepts. You can have a use case that references another. Um, if that makes sense. Hopefully that's, you know, one way to avoid it. Right. Registration could depend on login. You know, or like if you, depending on like how and when you want to record analytics within your application, you could have like some sort of analytics use case that goes into your other use cases. And we'll probably do this now that I've said it out loud, but we're not there yet. So let's just get rid of all of that. But this is all really good. This was a really great conversation. And I think that it's enough to mark the use case portion. So let's commit that code real quick. Let's split these up into a couple PRs. Login implementation. That's what we'll call this one. In this screen, we design the app architecture and build out the necessary components to power our login screen. September 29th. And we'll throw into PRs. I'll put all the links in later, but let's throw use case in its own PR real quick. Let's commit this, adding login use case for number 7. And then we will move on to the repository if there are no other thoughts on the use case work that we've done so far. Do we put it in one file? That's a good question. Let's talk about that. I'm kind of voting no, but we could talk about it because I don't really like the alternative. But let me make this pull request real quick, and then we can talk about that. We'll do that next. I should have actually. Let's. Oh God, we have a failure. Wait, what is the matching declaration name? Oh, I never renamed the file. Let's rename this file real quick. Yeah, we can actually make it part of this pull request. Let's close the other tabs. So, should it be in the same file? You could. Login use case simple. We could put it in the same file. I think like that makes sense, but personally, I don't like it because it just adds like more complexity to the file. And then I'm not really sure why I would, but what happens if I want different implementations of a use case? You know, then maybe I want them in their own file. And that's something we could do for the sample app. So one way we could avoid how I hate the IMPL naming convention is like, we want to build like just test cases for the sample app right now, right? So I could put like a success login use case. I could create this class, put it in a different file. And then when this one's invoked, we could just say return login result.success. And like we could leave it at that. And this is a temporary class to create a mock implementation of login use case that is always successful. And like we'll remove this by the end of the stream, but we could use it for now. Tim brings up a good suggestion, default thing instead of thing impl. Another one I would like to use, a different word to default is like the word production, like production login use case, which also means that it implies the existence of a debug login use case. And I think that that's valid, right? Yes, you were the only one. Because I think that like what I don't like about it is it really sells the idea that and I think when you've been programming long enough, you'll learn to love interfaces. But when you're learning programming, like it just makes interfaces feel like overkill. Because this is a tedious convention, which also implies that I only have one implementation of the interface. And then it's questionable, like, if I only have one implementation of the interface, why is it an interface in the first place? And those of us who have been coding for years, like we know that, but that is not like helpful to new developers. At least it wasn't for me. I hated this for years. Um, because they tell us to do that in the blocks. Yeah. Um, so we'll call this success login use case for now, and we'll leave it to show we put in a different file. Um, I don't actually know if I fixed the detect issues. Let's run this in the terminal. We did not. It's going to yell at me for unused private members. Um, here. Uh, how do I want to just suppress that for this PR, or do I want to remove them for this PR? You know what? We will satisfy the static analysis. Oh, and then it's just I can't do anything because it needs a thing. Okay. Uh, we're just gonna suppress for this PR because I don't want to remove this. I want it to be it's relevant to the pull request. I want it to be in the pull request. Okay, that worked. Fixing detect. So after this, we can set up the repository. Um, and actually, the repository is where our new result class is going to come into play. Um, but we'll do that after we push this. Adds the login use case as a layer of abstraction for logging in a user. Enhancement? That's what we'll call this one, I think. Credentials login use case. We could, but actually, like, I think that hmm. Let's talk about that while this is running. So you're saying you're right. So you're saying we'll rename this interface here. Let's do it. Because I would like to add okay, why the impl and not the so here's the problem. Here's the problem. Because the interface is ultimately what's defining that we need credentials. So a login with Google a login with Google use case would actually be an entirely different interface because the invoke function would look differently. Um, wouldn't it? Yeah. Um, yeah. But so this interface needs a way. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. It would be a separate use case down the line because I need a use case that can consume credentials. Right, but the parameters are different. And if we're using the invoke function here, then that's going to be a problem. Unless, theoretically, I wanted to be hacky and I made a Google one that ignored the parameters of the invoke function. Um, so I think like it could be a separate use case. I'm loving this battle. Um, okay, but like here's okay. So, but CP, think about this. If I change this to just be an invoke, um, interface is interface. Um, the view model calls this. How does the view model? How does the credentials use case get its information? Because remember, the view model doesn't know it's a credentials use case. So how does the credentials use case get its information? Oh, we need another sealed class. He wants to make a login type. Oh man. So we're saying let's type it out. I want to see it. I want to see it. Let's see if I hate it. So we're saying we could do sealed class login type. We could have credentials, which will have an email, password, and then because I don't know what information I would need, but I'll know I'll need it in the future, is I'm just gonna make it an object, but we could have like Google. Well, the use case is meant to be a facade. But hold on, you guys do not hold on. Let me catch up with all this. This is contentious. Um, so Wild Dog, you're right, but the suggestion is that the use case would be the use case would be the the wrapper around the thing. Um, to create a single use case with two class providers, this will I'm not sure what Jimmy means is like the problem, but um, well, okay, but here's what it would look like, right? So let me finish this thought. Let me finish this thought if you don't mind. So I want to finish it all the way through, and I don't have to commit this if we don't like it. But I'm gonna give this a fair shot for CP because I think he's onto something, and I think I could see how it will work in the future. So we create a login type. It's a sealed class that is either credentials or Google's. We have our login use case. It takes a login type. Whoop, not a login thread exception. I didn't know that was a thing. And it gives us a login result. Here's what our implementations look like. Let me talk through it all before we get all set. So the first one, we have a credentials login use case. This could be, we could even like, and then we can say, if, I guess one thing we could think about is like, we could think about some type safety here. We could say if is credentials, you know, um, or whoops, if is login type dot credentials. We return something. Okay, we do something based on that. Um, the implementation parameter can be. Can I do that? No, I can't do that here. Um, but my point being, let me simplify my point. So we have the credentials use case, right? We have the Google login use case. And then what we're saying is we could have like our production login use case. And then this can consume credentials login use case and a Google login use case. And then here we would basically have inside our invoke, we would have a when login type, and then here we would do the switch. You're right, like the next thing we would need is generics here. Then we make a two-factor auth use case. and then we just throw it inside our production use case. Um, okay, you lose, but call it by who? Which one do I pass into the view model? Right? Like if I don't want a single combining use case, okay, but then we're way back to okay, but then we're back to saying I thought we were trying to argue that we could have whoops, I went way too far. Um, that we could have one single use case, like you suggested. As a user, I want to log in. But it sounds like we can't do that. We need, as a user, I want to log in with credentials, and another one that is, you know, we'll make another interface later that is like our, you know, Google login use case that doesn't take anything, or it will take something. And then the view model would depend on both of these. Um, but I thought we were trying to argue that we wouldn't need to do this. I'm so confused. This is one of the things that's hard to talk to chat. Um, but I can only have one invoke function. So there cannot be multiple ways of logging in unless I add all those layers that I just had 30 seconds ago. And now I feel like I'm being trolled. I was so passionate about this. Oh my god. Um, executive decision. We will call it credentials login use case because that's what it does, and we are going to um, we are going to continue with this. And you know what? I will please the gods by calling this success credentials login use case. But we are going to keep it at that. And we'll move on. Okay. I don't know, arguing with CP. That's gonna be our commit message on that one. What a night. Lively chat here. I'm loving it. I'm also out of water. Might have to go. No, you're not stalling. I think you had like a genuine um thought process there, and like maybe I'm just not seeing it. I know you have me on Twitter or LinkedIn or something, and like if you want to talk separately, like maybe I'm just not seeing it. But if and when we get to the Google login, we can talk about it further. But let's focus on credentials for today. And I'm gonna mark login use case it's done.